I'd now like to introduce, if I may, Andrew Summers from Transport for London. Andy has recently taken up a new leadership role at TfL, managing the active travel and health strategy team in TfL's newly formed City Planning Directorate, having previously co-led TfL's cycling strategy. Thank you, Andy.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard, and thanks for inviting me here today to speak. Just to introduce myself, I've spent the last 2 years at TfL working in the cycling strategy team, co-managing that team, and I think it's reflective of TfL's attitude towards cycling, walking and health, is that going forward we're now bringing all of those into one team, and health is going to be a real driver of taking forward walking and cycling policy going forward. So as from this week, that's going to be my role going forward. And what this presentation is hopefully going to do is set out how we've come from a world of working on cycling to bringing all that together into an active travel agenda. So basically what I'm going to talk about today is why is cycling so important? Why does TfL and the Mayor care about it so much? What our ambition is for healthy streets, so not just cycling going forward, but walking and active travel. Where we've got to so far, and some learning points. And Richard talked earlier about what we know and what we don't know. Over the last few years, we've learned an awful lot, but there's still some things that we're finding very difficult in delivering cycling and walking schemes. So hopefully I can relay some of those back to you. And then I'm going to talk about the road ahead and basically how over the next few years we're going to be taking a slightly different approach to planning cycling alongside other modes going forward. So hopefully this will be interesting from that point of view. The first slide, you may have seen this already if you've seen any TfL presentation over the last 6 months, because basically it reflects the thing that we're really grappling with, and that's the future population growth of London. So at the minute we've got about 8.7 million population. That's going to grow to 10.5 million by 2041, which is the end of our current Mayor's transport strategy. And what that's going to mean for us is 5 million additional trips each day on the network that we're going to have to manage. And already it's extremely difficult to cater for that sort of demand. So an additional 5 million trips is going to be increasingly difficult. What it's going to mean economically, if we don't cater for that by sustainable modes, is about a 9 billion economic cost per year by 2030 if we don't grapple with that. So it's going to be a big challenge for us. We need a more sustainable and efficient transport system. Now, I mentioned the economic growth and the economic cost because that's the sort of thing that traditionally TfL has been really worried about. But with the new Mayor coming in last year and developing a healthy streets agenda, public health is actually now one of the key drivers of how we take policy forward over the next few years, alongside economic costs and transport impacts. And I'm going to just put some stats up here to describe, I guess, the starkness of the issues that we face. So at the minute, more than 40% of Londoners do not achieve the recommended 150 minutes of physical activity a week. And when you look in particular at different demographics, it's particularly an issue for young people today. So 8 in 10 children in London don't get the 1 hour a day of physical activity that they need, and 4 in 10 children in London are already overweight or obese. And I guess traditionally these are the sort of things that transport organisations may not have been so worried about, but with the sort of the new MTS coming in and the healthy streets approach and the increased emphasis from the Mayor on health, Transport for London is one of the key tools that the Mayor has to actually impact on that going forward. And I think some of the stats are quite stark, and the previous presentation highlighted this, and there's a few more that we've been using in our recent documentation. So if every Londoner walked or cycled 20 minutes a day, the health gains would be huge. We'd prevent 1 in 6 early deaths, and there'd be a huge saving to the local NHS, which currently we don't include in our transport calculations, but increasingly going forward I think we need to. And then it could help other things such as strokes and heart disease. We haven't mentioned things such as cancer, sort of health issues on there as well. And also, in terms of increased life, living 2 years longer if you introduce 3 hours standing. So these types of physical activity benefits that you might have if active travel was introduced. So what's our ambition for cycling and healthy streets? So the Mayor's transport strategy in its draft form was published in May this year. It set out a new set of ambitions for London over the period to 2041. I think the core underlying aim that we've got in it is the modal shift target. So at the minute we've got 64% of travel taking place by sustainable modes, which is public transport, walking and cycling. Where the Mayor wants to get to by 2041 is that to be increased to 80%. And you can see that the other way in terms of a reduction of car use to 20%. It's going to be a very challenging target to meet. The MTS, to achieve that target, basically focuses on 3 different things. Firstly, introducing healthy streets to London. So this is creating streets that people want to walk and cycle in, and also act to reduce car use, so disincentives to car use. Improving public transport, so making sure everyone has a good public transport experience. And then also the concept of good growth. So this is basically planning your new homes and jobs so that they unlock growth in a sustainable way, not contributing to increased car use, but helping to improve active travel modes. So this is basically the focuses of the Mayor's new approach. And cycling is absolutely fundamental to this strategy. We published some research earlier this year called Analysis of Cycling Potential. Some of you may have heard it. Basically, what this set out was how many of the current motorised trips in London could be made by sustainable modes. And what it showed as a headline figure was 8.2 million of the trips made today in London could actually be made by walking or cycling, particularly cycling. So nearly half of all car trips made by London residents could be cycled in around 10 minutes. 2/3 of car trips could be cycled in under 20 minutes. And when you look at the geographical distribution of this, a lot of this is actually in outer London. We've done a lot of work investing in inner London. A lot of our new cycle superhighways are there. There's actually huge potential now in outer London to spread some of those benefits even further. So if we want to pursue this sort of cycling strategy, we've looked at other cities and shown how it can be done, and encouraged by the progress that's been made there, but the realism that actually it's taken a lot of them 20, 30, 40 years to get to the point where they are now, and it's recognising where London is now. And I think we see ourselves in a group of cities, major world cities alongside New York and Paris, where we currently have about 2% mode share for cycling, Paris a bit higher. Other cities in Europe, Berlin 15%, but then I guess the shining example, Copenhagen and Amsterdam in the 30 and 40% mode shares. We've all got a long way to go before we get there. But I'm just going to sort of show over the next few slides what we've done to get to how we've got to and some of the lessons we've learned. So basically, sort of the ride so far. If you look at the diagram here on the left-hand side, this is basically the high-quality cycle network that we have at the minute. So I guess what this includes is the good quality cycle superhighways and the first quiet way we've got in. So this is where we've got to by spring 2017. In the Mayor's transport strategy, he set out an aim for 70% of Londoners to live within 400 metres of this strategic cycle network going forward. So we're currently at the point where 9% of Londoners live within 400 metres. So a long way to go, but this does reflect quite a lot of hard work over the last few years to get to that point. The TfL business plan was published last December 2016, and what that set out was a 5-year investment programme over the period to 2022. £770 million worth of cycling investment was included in that, which is about £154 million a year. It's about £17 a head per London population, which is on a par with Amsterdam and Copenhagen, but obviously a long way to go before we get to there. What we expect that to achieve is the network on the right-hand side. What that includes is some new cycle superhighways, and a lot of that would be quiet ways. So we've currently had sort of the first 1 or 2 quiet ways delivered. We expect over the next 5 years the quiet way programme to increase quite a lot, and its coverage to extend through inner and outer London as well. By that point, you'd get to just under 35% of Londoners living within 400 metres of the strategic cycle network. Still a long way from our long-term target of 70% of Londoners. So by 2022, we'll be sort of halfway there, but nowhere near in terms of getting there to our 2041 target. So what have we done so far? Basically, the Emergent Network comprises a mix of route types. The picture on the left-hand side is the north-south cycle superhighway. This is actually Blackfriars Bridge. And what we've tried to do over the last few years is introduce fully segregated cycle superhighways. So the first blue paint cycle superhighways that were talked about earlier on, a lot of those were sort of blue paint on a main route, not always fully segregated. What we've tried to do in central London, particularly with north-south and the east-west route along the embankment and also CS5, is to introduce fully segregated routes. what this does is overcome the main barrier to cycling that we've found through our research, which is safety or perception of safety. And what you can see there in that particular picture is that some of the more dangerous traffic, such as freight, is fully segregated away from cyclists. That works quite well on the TLRN, the Transport for London road network on main routes. What we also have been trying to do is develop a Quiet Ways programme. So the pictures in the middle are Quiet Way 1 out from central London towards Bermondsey. There's two different types of treatment I've shown in the pictures here. One is actually approaching a main road, and one of the barriers to cycling has been going when you try to cross a main arterial road. You need a treatment there to help the cyclist cross. So this represents one of those. And then adding new links. So the link at the bottom is near Millwall Football Ground, basically adding an off-road link to allow a large volume of cyclists to use that. And those quiet road routes are basically different types of low treatment intervention along them to allow an end-to-end route, strategic route to appear, often using existing roads, but often using off-road routes as well, canal sides, those types of things. So a different type of route to the one on the TLRN. And then the picture on the right-hand side represents one of our mini Hollands. So we have 3 mini Hollands. Basically, this is an intensive investment in a relatively small area, designed to try and replicate some of the conditions that you might have on the continent. This picture here is Orford Road in Waltham Forest. Basically, they've redesigned the road so that traffic movement through it is a lot more limited, allowing pedestrians and cyclists to almost take over that road. It's been a big success, and one of the key successes from that has been the economic benefits. For the first time, all the shops along that road have had no vacant premises at all. So as well as sort of benefits for walkers and cyclists, there's been an economic benefit from that as well. So basically, that's the types of things that we're doing at the minute. Supported by a range of enabling measures, so not only infrastructure but other parts of the package as well. So for example, I don't know if any of you have been on the On-Ride London or the free ride that goes along with it. Basically shut down parts of central London and allow people to cycle around. STARS, which is working with schools and young people to allow them to cycle better. Top right is our cycle safety campaign, and we're doing an awful lot to develop cycle initiatives, particularly with the freight industry, where we've had the Safer Lorry scheme now in for a couple of years to improve the conditions, improve the standards of lorries to make it easier to see and interact with cyclists. The London Cycle Design Standards has been a key thing that we introduced about 3 years ago. Basically, this sets out our aspirations for both TfL and boroughs to design cycle routes to high-quality standards that we think will enable new people to use them. And then other schemes, such as the Santander Cycle Scheme, which has been incredibly successful in getting people to cycle more and overcoming the barrier of access to a bike. And also what we're seeing more recently is that some companies are starting to develop their own dockless cycle schemes in some of the sort of inner and outer London boroughs. And that is going to be a very interesting thing for us going forward about how we work with those companies to manage that, to make sure that they're high quality and serve the growing numbers of cyclists that we want. So the investment overall is showing pretty positive results. So that the last year that we have full stats for is 2015. We had nearly 700,000 cycle journey stages a day. We should get the next round of stats through in December in Travel in London. But basically, we consider cycling to be a major mode of transport now. You know, it's 10% of all bus journeys, a fifth of all tube journeys. So I think you can start to consider it a form of mass transit. And we saw the same stat earlier on, 131% increase since 2000. Most of that growth has actually taken place in central London, and that's no surprise really, because that's where a lot of the investment has taken place, particularly the new cycle superhighways. Some of the stats for the new cycle superhighways have been particularly impressive. So when the east-west cycle superhighway opened on Embankment, there was a 54% increase in cyclists using that route, as opposed to the 2014 situation when we hadn't had it built. North-south route increased cyclists along that route by 32%, and even the Quiet Way 1 has been very successful, so a 56% increase in cycling on that route since we introduced the measures there. So this stuff really does work. and where we've delivered it in central London, we've seen a huge increase in cycling growth, so that the 223% increase in cyclists entering central London since 2000 reflects the 8 cycle superhighways we've built there, Quietway 1, and quite a lot of the other measures that we've been developing since then. So it's been good, and I guess one of the key things is actually we've been able to show that we can actually move more people along cycle superhighways and segregated infrastructure than if you just have a road without that. And this has, I guess, allowed us to develop the concept of people movement rather than traffic movement. So actually moving people along roads rather than the number of vehicles. And it's been really interesting to do a bit of a case study on the Blackfriars Bridge example. So this is the photo I showed you earlier on. Basically, the cycle lane there now is able to move more people per hour in the peak hour than the main carriageway can if you assume that the current traffic mix stays the same. And that's been really useful for us to be able to make the case internally and also externally for being able to develop these types of schemes because it actually allows us to achieve some of our modal shift targets and prove that it's actually people that we want to think about rather than actual individual vehicles themselves. So what have we learnt? I've told you some of the good news there. It's actually been really difficult to do some of this stuff over the last few years. And a lot of the difficult things have been in communications, persuading other people that this is the right thing to do, and some of the challenges we've had, particularly with the local communities and local businesses, in implementing a lot of these measures. So I've got a series of key learning points to go through here. One of the big issues has been selling cycling to local communities, and this has come out really strongly in the mini Holland boroughs. So we've got 3 mini Holland boroughs, Kingston, Enfield and Waltham Forest, between them sharing 100 million to try and invest in new cycle facilities. And you think that would sound great to local people, but actually there's been quite a bit of kickback against some of these measures. And some of these have been around, I guess, things that people locally really care about that we might not have taken consideration of when we started. So the diagram on the left-hand side is about shaping local business perceptions. This is from Waltham Forest, and it relates to a business survey that was done as we were implementing the scheme there. And the diagram on the left-hand side shows the top 4 things that businesses think would improve Lea Bridge Road for their customers. So Lea Bridge Road is a key road there. And they cited things such as better car parking, better located car parking, better crossings. So a very car-focused concerns and thinking that their customers cared about car parking. But when you actually ask the visitors to Lea Bridge Road what they care about, there's a different story. So 32% better crossings, 31% less traffic, and then protected cycle lanes and pedestrian signage. So whilst sort of local businesses thought that sort of car-related concerns were the key things, actually provision for sustainable transport was actually the sort of thing that visitors wanted. And working through this with local communities has been a difficult thing to do. I think the diagram on the right shows the same thing. I've just still got 5 minutes left, so I'll quickly go through these. Impacts on other road users. So as we've developed the schemes, there's been a lot of complaints about the fact that the roadworks have increased congestion. What we've had to do is minimise impact on other roads by working with buses and then being very clear on our communications around cycling scheme roadworks. And then finally, securing stakeholder support. Working with key businesses in London has been one of the key successes, actually. There's been a piece of work called Cycling Works that's actually helped us get a lot of our schemes through approval, and all the businesses on the right-hand side have signed up to the fact that building a sort of a cycling network for London is going to be a good thing for their businesses and their employees. So I think I've got about 4 minutes left now to go through the last bit, which is where we're going. But I think the key thing is going forward, we've got a huge challenge in terms of the MTS. So increased physical activity targets and car reduction. We need to maximise funding and value for money and aligning with other modes. So the bus congestion I talked about earlier is key. So what we're going to do is target investment where the impact is highest and achieve multiple outcomes with core funding. So I think that the thing that I'm going to leave you with is basically the piece of analysis we've done to work out how we're doing this going forward. So in June, we published the Strategic Cycling Analysis. What this does is sets out an evidence-based approach to designing our cycle network going forward. I'll quickly run through the slides on this. This is where people cycle now in London. This is a cycle model we've got. What it shows is a high propensity to cycle in central London in particular. And then using the potential for new trips, we ran through the model where those new trips could take place based on current car trips. And what we found was a wider geographical spread of cycle trips going forward. We then overlaid our existing network and worked out where the gaps were. And then what we did is prioritised within each of those categories where the highest current potential and future trips would be. And the diagram on the right shows all the growth areas of London, basically where we want to provide for going forward. And so what we've got to, and this is our basis now for going forward, is a prioritised network up to 2041 to address the current and future demand for cycling. And this is the thing that was published in June, and if you saw the press release about it, basically the red routes in here are the top 25 future cycle routes for London in terms of priority. And we're now working on those 25 routes as the next generation of cycle routes going forward based on a solid evidence base. So where are we going now? Well, that strategic cycling analysis is our foundation for going forward for delivering cycling in London. We need to deliver TfL's existing business plan over the next 5 years, but those 25 priority corridors are the key core routes going forward, and we're currently working on feasibility for some of those and the way forward for how we deliver them, obviously working with local boroughs to do that. But that's just the core network. What we also need to do is develop the local network within London. So that's why we've developed a Livable Neighbourhoods programme, borough cycle strategies, and working with growth areas and new developments to make sure that they include all the key routes from the wider analysis. So the wider network, the orange and the pink routes in there as well, to be able to develop that network by 2041. And then we shouldn't forget what the supporting measures are going to give us as well. There's going to be a next generation of new projects going forward. Dockless cycle hire I talked about earlier on. And then we see there's a huge potential for e-bikes as well. I think in Holland at the minute, there's a higher mode share for e-bikes than there is in London for the whole of cycling altogether. So we think there's a huge potential for e-bikes. So hopefully that's just about in time. It gives you a sort of a summary of where we've come from, the key lessons we've learnt, and the analysis and evidence-based approach we're using going forward. So thank you very much.
Andy, that's fantastic. I really enjoyed that presentation. There's time for 2 quick questions. There's one here and one there. The hands that went up first. Thanks, Jane. And again, if you could just say your name and where you're from, that'd be really helpful.
Thanks. Dennis Hussain from Local Transport Today. I'm just wondering if you've considered emulating what Birmingham are doing, where they're actually giving bikes away, provided people carry out training. And it seems to be working quite well there, reaching out to people in deprived areas.
Yep, we have a local communities grant scheme, so I'm not sure if you're aware of that. I can get details through. Basically, each year we give local communities a grant for them to then take forward schemes in their own areas, led by our behaviour change team. I think there was over 20 that were done last year, and we had an event a few weeks ago which emphasised the benefits of that. But I agree, that's a key thing. One of the key reasons that we do that is that the existing existing sort of gender split and demographic split of our cyclists is very much sort of male between 20 to 50. And whilst we've provided facilities that are protected, there's still a need to get more a wider range of community groups involved in cycling. So we do see that as a key thing going forward to get these different demographics involved in cycling.
Thank you. And one more.
Hello, Conrad Haig. I'm an independent consultant. Sam, really interesting presentation. Some really nice sort of brave step forwards there. I was particularly interested in your slide that had what businesses want versus what visitors want.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
I just wondered what sort of reaction you've got, if you've ever shown it to LEPs or BIDs in your area, and what's the sort of conversations you're having with those people about that slide?
Yeah, so we've got we do work with BIDs. We're going to publish this at some point, but we have recently talked to BIDs about sort of their support for healthy streets, walking and cycling, they are actually really supportive. A huge number are. But I guess they're the ones that have probably a more strategic approach to business in their area. And I guess it's making sure that the individual members of those bids are the ones that are supportive. So I think bids are on side, and other business organisations are as well. But it's when it gets down to those individual members, those local businesses, the one that you're going to outside their sort of store, you're going to take away their parking space and replace it with a cycle highway. That's where we found the real issue, and I think we can use bids a lot more to help with that debate and that persuasion going forward.
Fantastic. Andy, thank you very much.
Yeah.